It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160 and 101.1 FM, 21 minutes after 9 o'clock, and a chance to talk this morning with Bob Spitz. He's the author of the book Reagan, An American Journey, and I have to tell you how much I enjoyed this book. Good morning.
Good morning to you too, Todd. Nice to be here.
It's good to have you with us. Now, we have a window at the bottom of the hour, so we have to get right to news at 9:30. So I only have you for a short time, and I regret that already. So let's jump right into it with Ronald Reagan, because the book is so tremendously written, and I love the period of transition when the acting career is drying up and his political life is just beginning to blossom, and his eye-opening experiences, and he went from being as liberal as you can be to a conservative icon, it seems like in the blink of an eye. Probably took a little bit longer, huh?
Yeah, he was in Hollywood at the time, and he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and he was a real flag-waving Roosevelt liberal, but he was worried that communists were infiltrating the Hollywood community and were causing a lot of labor unrest there, and he kind of blamed it on the left. And that's when his politics begin to skew from the left to the right. And it really, you hit it on the head. It really does happen kind of in the blink of an eye.
One of the great things about it is you can almost see him working it out in his words. He would actually argue points for hours and hours on end with people and actually drive them a little bit nuts.
Yeah, everybody who knew him in Hollywood told me that in between every take of the movies that he worked on the sets, he would just corral the actors and talk politics. It got to the point where they would wait to see where he sat down for lunch at the commissary on the Warner Brothers lot. Of course, they didn't want to sit next to him. They knew they'd get an earful all day. I mean, he was a political junkie.
When it came to the point where he decided to fully become a real politician, talk about that a little bit. The writings that he did that actually paved the way for it, they really were transformative, weren't they?
They were. It really began when he was elected president of the Screen Actors Guild, his union, and he finds his voice, and he realizes that he can take a stand and really make a difference in people's lives. From there, he gravitates to being the spokesperson for General Electric, and that meant that he traveled around talking to people who worked in their plants, real, working-class people, blue-collar people, middle-class people, who had real problems in their lives, and Reagan began to listen. He just absorbed it all, and he talked to what he felt was the common man, and this started to have a great influence on him, and it really formed his political bedrock.
Bob Spitz is our guest, and the book is Reagan, An American Journey. Ronald Reagan has been really difficult for authors to get a grip on. He's been pretty elusive. What made you want to tackle him as a subject?
Yeah, you're right about that. He was not a reflective man, and I've read interview after interview that he gave, and he knows how to sidestep things. Just like with the Beatles and with Julia Child, I felt that I had to break through that shell that was created and get to the heart of who this guy was, and that meant, starting at the beginning, going to his hometown, finding out who he was, where he came from, what kind of person he began, and then talking to, in this case, 350 people who either were friends, family friends, colleagues, administrative officials, who could give me a real behind-the-scenes look at who the man Reagan was, as well as just the face on the postage stamp, the politician that we see on TV. And I think very gradually over this 6-year process, Ronald Reagan seems to come alive on the page, and hopefully at the end you get a real sense of Ronald Reagan the man.
You really do, and I have to admit I wasn't prepared for how entertaining his childhood was. As a writer, that must have been very pleasing for you to bring that together, because you did a great job on it.
Well, thanks. I have two obligations. One is to write a real authoritative book that is sourced well, but the other is to keep an eye on the reader and make sure they're having a compelling experience reading. So I set out to write a page-turner, and Reagan's life gave me all the material I needed, because it frames the entire 20th century, and he meets some of the greatest players on the world stage in his career. And the story, it was like writing an adventure story.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see where you would feel that way. Take me to the, not the end of his life, but the beginning of the end, the Alzheimer's section where he is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It is so moving when they actually sit him down and tell him that this is what his problem is, and this is... And he and Nancy and there are others gathered there in the room, and he walks over by himself to a desk and he begins writing. Take me to that moment.
Yeah, you just set the entire scene. Nancy got the diagnosis before Reagan knew about it, and she knew it was going to be heartbreaking. And her chief of staff, Fred Ryan, who's now the publisher of the Washington Post, was also in the room, and they took me through it so that I could place the reader right in that room as Nancy, Fred, and the doctor confront Reagan and tell him. And his eyes kind of glassed over, not because of the Alzheimer's, but because he was going into deep thought about this. And he got up by himself, and he walked across the room, and he sat down at his desk. And in one brief flash, he writes this heartfelt letter to the American people explaining exactly what was happening to him and what they could expect from him in the future. And when he was done with it, Fred looked at it, and Reagan said, let's get this typed up and get it out. And Fred looked at it and said, you know what? We're going to put it out in your own handwriting. And they did. And Reagan wrote it right off the top of his head. It was a really moving, heartfelt letter, and I think it's kind of a tearjerker in the book.
It really is. And one of the things that makes it that way is the fact that we recall that. That happened fairly recently. And we recall that, and to know what was really happening in that moment, it really is a poignant moment, and such a great job by you of putting it together. The whole book
Thanks so much.
It is just a wonderful read, and it's one of those books you want to take your time with, but you can't because you just love what you're reading word for word. And I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us today. Wish we had more of it.
Yeah, that's okay, Todd. You did a great job, and I really appreciate your interest in it.
Well, my pleasure, indeed, in the reading and in being able to talk with you this morning. Have a great day.
Great, you too. Thanks so much.
There is Bob Spitz.